Hey everyone, Cooper here, host of the fine podcast you're listening to. I just want to let you know that the episode you clicked on has a format that is very heavily inspired by a podcast called The Bookening. To be clear, our thoughts and opinions in this episode are our own, but the format is very similar to this podcast. I just wanted to give you a heads up and give credit where it is due. With that out of the way, enjoy the show. Coming up next, Booking It reads Gulliver's Travels. And welcome back to Booking It. I'm, of course, your humble and eloquent host. Joining me today is my good friend, Matthew Killingsworth. How you doing, Matthew?
Howdy.
Well, here we are, another edition of the Cooper and Matthew Show, and I have to say that the reason we are doing a book that you might have never heard of before is because of a scheduling mishap that may or may not be my fault. So the next book on the schedule is Pride and Prejudice, but when we are reading it for school, I just did not align the dates up right. So the week we were supposed to be recording that was the week that we were supposed to be in the middle of reading it. So I apologize. Don't worry. Next week, you're going to get Pride and Prejudice, and then the week after that, you're going to get Pride and Prejudice Part 2. So don't worry. It's going to be back-to-back-to-back episodes of Booking It. We'll get everything done. Don't worry about it. Matthew, your thoughts?
Woohoo.
Yeah.
Sounds like a lot of extra recording.
Technically, this is an extra recording since, Isaiah's... Oh, wait, we should mention Isaiah's gone. He's on a hunting trip.
Well, I think they noticed.
Yeah.
He would have said something by now.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, would he, though?
I'll say it for him.
Yeah, he would.
Hilly.
Hilly. What does that even mean?
It's hello, I think. I've never tried
hello
to translate
with an
it.
E.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Matthew, today we're talking about a book called Gulliver's Travels. I don't think you have much baggage, but what baggage did you bring?
Well, I've seen the movie of this before, but I did not know that it was a book. But then whenever I saw our book list for this year, I assumed like it was the same thing and not a totally different Gulliver's Travels.
Right.
So I've seen the movie that's like whatever it is on Disney Plus with like Jack Black or something.
Yeah.
It was kind of weird, but relatively funny. Yeah. Anyways, so I kind of like knew what it was about.
Yeah.
But I did not know about like the whole thing about what's his face, Jonathan Swift, and his use and creation of like satire,
yeah,
and how he used those.
Yes, for me, really, I think I've just heard about this book, kind of different things. I don't know. It's just kind of been a name of a book that's kind of popped up that I had never read until, like Matthew said, we were reading it for school, and I kind of knew that it was supposed to be kind of sarcastic and use of satire, and I knew it was kind of really absurd, extreme, and somewhat, I don't know, inappropriate, but I read it. So here we are. All right, Matthew, why don't you go ahead and give us the book in 30 seconds. The book of 30 seconds is the segment, of course, in which one of the panelists describes the book of discussion in 30 seconds or less. Time starts now.
So this book consists of 4 books, the first 2 of which I've read, the second 2 of which I have not read, but Cooper's read the second 2. So in the first 2 books, at the very beginning, he travels to a place.
Time's up.
Called.
Come on.
He travels to a place called Lilyfoot where there's a bunch of tiny people, and he basically gets to be a giant even though he's still normal sized and they're all tiny. But he gets to act like a giant, and it's very interesting. We'll talk about it more. I don't have time right now. And then in the second book, he travels to a place where he gets to be tiny because it's basically the exact same but the opposite.
Right.
It's like a reverse.
And on purpose.
Yes.
All right. Well, Matthew.
That didn't tell you anything, but
yeah, it's just basically about this guy named Lemuel Gulliver, and he goes on a bunch of misadventures to random islands and encounters random species and learns things about human nature and satire.
Well, like fake human nature.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
So
it's kind of weird, but also like pretty funny. It's probably one of my
it's
favorite
pretty
books we've read so far, just because like I enjoyed reading it,
fun. Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it was just entertaining.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the first question is, what'd you think?
Oh, what did I think? Oh, I thought you were going to just say about blah blah blah.
No,
I was
no,
like,
no.
what? I just told you. I told you I thought it was entertaining,
Yeah.
and it was one of my favorite books so far this year.
Yeah. Yeah, as for me, I found it quite entertaining as well. And for me, I don't know. I liked, this might sound weird, but I did like the whimsical nature of it. I know that on like the back of the cover of the book it says, for children it is a whimsical fairy tale, and for parents it is a, and so I was like, oh, maybe I'm still a child. But I really did enjoy the kind of fantastical nature of it, which I think is quite effective with the satire as well. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I think first off, when discussing this, we have to define satire. So Matthew, what's satire?
Satire is the use of sarcasm to prove a bigger point.
Wow, good job, Matthew.
I just made up that definition right now. So
no, I know that was pretty good definition.
thank you.
Anyway, in Gulliver's Travels, the author Jonathan Swift uses a bunch of satire to kind of obviously make a larger point. He uses sarcasm to make a larger point. And so, for example, there's this scene where Matthew said he travels to an island called Lilliput, and he encounters these natives, and they're very, very small. And the way that they elect their basically officials into high office is the king demands that a rope dancing contest be held. And so the little inhabitants get up on a rope and they dance, and the person who dances the best gets the highest position. And his point was being that King George of England at the time, this was written in the 1700s, it really just used his money and influence to get his friends into power, and they weren't really qualified to be there. So it's kind of an example.
I feel like it's also just like politics in general is just poking fun at them.
It is, yeah. I mean,
It's
honestly,
like who has the best show? It's that's what it is.
right.
Who has
It's
the best show?
politicians who is the best showman, basically.
Actor. Yeah.
Do you think that has some kind of weight even now today, when we have more of a republic? You know, do you think?
Well,
that...
yeah. Because I mean, that's part of like how our government is set up, is that for there to be like a very high position of power held, like they're supposed to be elected by the people because it's a free country, and like that's just how it's set up. So, but for all these different positions, like on a local level, on a state level, on a national level, like for anything that applies to, like at this point, kind of whatever your political views are and whatever side you're on, there's always like the person who gets it is always going to have some amount of acting or some amount of just being a good showsman and like being a good dancer, to use that analogy. Right, and so that's why, I mean, it was just so much little stuff like that was just hilarious about the book.
Yeah, I agree. I think that in the modern day, me and Matthew took an economics course last year for our homeschool curriculum, and the guy was, he was a libertarian, basically. That's the short way about it. But what he said in the book was a politician is a person who is skilled at winning elections, and that's it. And that was my favorite definition I've ever gotten for anything, almost. Is a politician is someone who's not really qualified in most senses to be running the government, and they don't really care about running the government.
Well, yeah, I mean, even if there are like really qualified people who are experts in an area or have experience in a different area, they're going to push that as far as it goes to help them. They're not going to just rest on it. You know, like even if there was like someone running for president, for example, who had been in a lot of wars and he's like, I have so much experience with the army, blah, blah. He would like talk it up and make it even a bigger deal and just stretch it as far as it could go versus just like letting people see that and like actually want to vote for him, because that's what your opponent's going to be doing too. So you have to like fight it.
Yeah. I mean, we think about it, the most popular president of the last 50 years has been Ronald Reagan.
He was an actor. And
before he was a politician, he was an actor. Right. So put two and two together, he literally, maybe because he was running up against Jimmy Carter, but he literally smoked him, right? Like Jimmy Carter's legacy is showing that he can make the map look that red. Like I think Ronald Reagan won every single state except for like 3, except for maybe 1. He had like the greatest number of electoral college votes ever. But he was a famous actor, right? He was very well spoken. And I'm not saying he was a bad president, 'cause I think he was a good president, but he won that election because he was an actor and he's a very smooth talker and a very good presenter.
We did.
We kind of got off on a little rabbit trail there, but satire. So, yeah, good. Yeah, no worries. Isaiah's not here to keep us on the straight and narrow. So, would you say that this book ever goes overboard on its use of satire, or it is too offensive, or it uses satire that's too absurd? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, just because I thought the use of satire was so interesting, I didn't really ever mind it. And like, I don't know, just because it wasn't like he was trying to be, like, he was obviously trying to be goofy, and if he was trying to seriously address all these issues at like and actually try to fix them versus just point them out, then he would have done it a different way. But I think he was just trying to point them out in a funny way, and I think satire was the perfect thing to do that. But obviously there were a couple points, we probably don't need to mention them on here, where it was a little bit like inappropriate or weird, just the actual content of what he was talking about. But I didn't think that I didn't think at any point the use of satire was offensive or inappropriate or anything like that. I know you said like in the last couple books you might have thought that it was at one point, but do you have a specific example or?
Okay, I think I want to get into that a little bit later, but I'll give a kind of a broad overview now. So the first part specifically, I think, is one of the best parts in the sense that it's the most whimsical in nature. It has the best parts of both the story and satire, but then the satire is very specific. It's very context driven. Like I wouldn't understand the satire now unless I, for example, looked up what the context was when he was insulting King George here, is insulting the way he got elected officials into office. And I thought, in that sense, it was very precise, and it was not too extravagant. And by the way, I do think that satire is an extremely effective tool in revealing hypocrisy and exposing lies and things like that.
Right, but that's kind of what the key word is. What you said was revealing hypocrisy. It doesn't actually, it doesn't necessarily solve any problems. That's why sarcasm is kind of like looked down upon, even when it's funny.
Right.
Or like why your parents don't want you to be sarcastic. It's because that's not actually moving anything forward. All it is just like making fun of how far away you are.
But satire generally has a larger point to it. It has a reason.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I thought that it was all very concise and controlled. And in the last part, he really wasn't. He was using satire in a way that was so extreme, and it wasn't even revealing hypocrisy. It was just insulting humanity. And I'm not kidding. Like, it was that, and he was literally ranting about everything wrong with humanity.
That's weird.
In very, very detailed language. So, we'll talk about it later. I think the obvious comparison point to Gulliver's Travels in the modern day is probably the Babylon Bee.
Yeah.
So, for those of you who don't know, the Babylon Bee is a Christian conservative, satire site, basically. And they just make fun of things in the news. Like, one of my favorites was Biden proposes $1.9 trillion bill to see what's causing all that inflation. Right, so it's just it's making things up, but it's to prove a point. Like, this point is Biden's spending a lot of money and it's causing a lot of inflation.
And also the way he's spending money isn't actually like...
As you say, it's not helpful too. Right, exactly. But I think that sometimes, and you can probably agree with me on this, the Babylon Bee does go a little bit overboard on insulting AOC, or might I say heresy.
I don't read as many
literally
as them
one
as
of
you
their
do,
one of their titles was, yeah, that's true. I do have the app, but one of their titles was 10 ways Trump is exactly like Jesus, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I was like, that's a little bit far, I think. And then things like AOC can't tie her shoes or something like that. It's just so silly and so stupid. And I'm like, look, I get AOC is not the smartest person alive, but you don't need to insult her, I don't know, that much. I think the Babylon Bee does go overboard. And I think that sometimes the Gulliver's Travels does the same thing. It's normally pretty concise in what it does, but every now and then it'll put the toe across the line and do something that's kind of offensive. Anyway, So we kind of already talked about it, but what do you think was the main point of part 1? Gulliver going to this little island of little people.
Oh, it was. I feel like it was him getting to become like a center of attention and like the big guy, because he.
Yeah.
I mean, he was obviously way bigger than them, so he could do way more stuff for them.
Yeah, and it's also metaphorical too.
Okay.
Like
how
he
so?
was able to kind of have a bird's eye view of their faults.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I guess that makes sense.
And in the next part, he goes to like a giant land, and then they have like a bird's eye view on his life basically, and it's insulting to them. So it's kind of
Wait, what are the
you know,
last two parts? What are the
antithesis.
last two islands he goes to?
Okay, so the last two islands. So the last one he goes to several, but basically he gets mutinied. He's a captain of the ship. He gets thrown overboard on like a little canoe, and he goes off. Then he goes up to, I think they're. I never got a clear description. I think they're regular sized people, and they speak obviously a different language. And he first goes to an island that's like floating above the ground, and so it's like a floating island. And there he's criticizing scientists and mathematicians because basically all of their houses are not built with right angles, and so they fall over a lot.
What?
And then he goes down to the ground on another island. It's not floating. And he goes to this academy where basically everybody tries out stupid ideas and think they'll work because he's criticizing people who think that they're more intelligent than they think they are. And that's all fine. But then the last one, he goes to an island, and it's filled with rational horses, and humans are the beasts. Like, that's literally, and I'll get into that later, but that's basically what it is. But yeah, I think part 1 was really about Gulliver getting a bird's eye view on these little squabbling little people who are fighting, 6-inch high people are fighting wars with each other because the other side opens their eggs the different way than they do.
Yeah. Right.
It's silly.
Which is also
so part
a satire,
2, Mr. Gulliver, sorry.
because he's just
Yes,
making fun
right.
of like how if you're I don't know, God, for example, looking down on us, like, look at the little stuff we fight wars over.
Yeah, exactly. And even the church too.
Yeah.
Sometimes. So then part 2, Gulliver goes home, says hi to his family. And then 2 weeks later he's gone again, and he goes to an island filled with giants. So what was Gulliver trying to get across with part 2 really?
What was Swift, you mean?
Yeah, sorry.
I guess it was just like,
By the way, Gulliver is gullible if you haven't noticed.
well, hey,
That would be his
he's
name.
learning a lot, right? Give him a break.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's just like it's the reverse. Is like he gets to see, like, he just came from being all like, oh, look at all their little dumb arguments and like all this stuff that they do. Then it's like other people examining him like that. So it's kind of just the reverse, and he switches positions.
Right. And he's not really using as much satire as he is blatant criticism in the voice of
Yeah,
another
that's why
character.
I liked the first one better, is because it used more.
Yeah. Right, the first part was more satire and storytelling, and the second one was basically Gulliver has a long discourse with the giant prince about why England is stupid and why, in the words of the prince, it is full of the little what was he say? What did he say? The most odious vermin to ever have crawled the earth, or something like that. Yeah. So now I kind of want to talk about the final part, because part 3 really is kind of the same as part 1 and 2. He's just going on some more adventures and doing some criticisms, but then part 4 just goes all the way overboard. So what happens, like I said, he's captain of a ship, his crew mutinies, they put him in a boat, and he sails off, and he arrives at this island, and he's walking on this island, and then a horse is there. And then you get some, slow descriptions, and it seems like the horse is intelligent, and then he's talking with the two horses are talking, and then he says, hi, I don't know if you're intelligent or not, but blah, 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 this is my situation, can you help me? And then he keeps hearing this word, Yahoo, Yahoo. And then they take him to their dwelling, a bunch of other horses, he hears the word again, Yahoo, Yahoo. And then he learns some language. After a few days, they take him out, and he sees a Yahoo. And a Yahoo is basically I don't know. It's supposed to be basically the worst version of humanity possible. Is it's a human that is so beast-like and is so unshapely and is shaped weird and has those disgusting habits and is covered in hair and all of that. And then the horse is the most rational beings. And so it really is just like, it's not even satire. Like, it's just ranting about everything. And so much like the other books, he'll have a discussion with the master of his house, the intelligent horse. By the way, these horses have a weird name. It's called the Houyhnhnms. Like Houyhnhnms. That's what it's called. But anyway, he has discussions, and the horses are basically purely rational. They agree on everything. They are perfect. They have no need for war, no need for killing. And then this guy is just growing more and more disgusted with humanity in general. Gulliver is over time. He spends like 3 years with them. And then basically at the end of the part, the horses gather and have a council and make Gulliver leave or become like a regular Yahoo that live in a pen and, are disgusting. And so he has to leave, and he's so sad. And let me read this part. So he's returned. He goes to his house, finds his family. Hang on. Let me find where it is. Okay. My wife and my family received me with great surprise and joy, because they concluded me certainly dead. But I must freely confess the sight of them only filled me with hatred, disgust, and contempt, all the more by reflecting on the near alliance I had to them. For although since my unfortunate exile from the Houyhnhnm country, I had compelled myself to tolerate the sight of Yahoos, to which he refers to regular rational humans. By the way, the Yahoos are not rational. They're basically beasts. And to converse with Don Pedro de Mendez, who kind of rescued him, yet my memory and imaginations were perpetually filled with the virtues and ideas of those exalted Houyhnhnms. And that's basically what he says. I think later on he says, in a few years, I finally let my wife sit at the kitchen table and eat with me, because he was still getting used to their smell and all that. So anyway, it is just disgusting, and the satire goes overboard.
I don't even see how that's satire.
If you haven't read it, it's not satire. It's just him ranting about the state of humanity. It's about, 60 pages, and if you have time the next couple of days, I would recommend you read it, because I think it's very informative on what Jonathan Swift really wanted to do. So I want to ask one question. I know you haven't read it, but in there, it's kind of the thing. The Houyhnhnms are governed by pure reason alone, by nothing else.
Huh.
And then he's kind of criticizing the humans because they don't rule by reason alone. So do you think that reason alone is enough to govern a rational creature, or is it not?
Well, what are you defining as reason alone?
Whatever you want to define it as.
Like just infinite wisdom type of thing, or
no, just logic, our ability to think and reason.
well,
Is that enough alone?
it's hard to say as all of us together, because everyone reasons differently.
But is reasoning enough though, alone by itself, to govern a rational creature?
So what you're saying is they were each there wasn't like a governor. They were each individually made all their own decisions.
Right. They were each all only rational. They agreed upon everything basically.
Oh, I mean, I guess for rational horses who all agree upon everything, then that probably works, but I don't think it would work for us.
Why
well,
not?
Because everyone has their own reasons for doing things, and I mean, like, people who commit crimes, it's not like they're just doing it most of them are not doing it just to commit the crime. They're thinking about like what it's going to do for them, and they're like, well, this is the risk I'm taking, that I could go to jail, I could get caught, but the reward is so much better. And so in their mind, that's a rational decision that if this works out, then like I'm gonna have my life made, and they're like, that's a rational decision, so they do that thing, and it's not like that's not the right decision. And like with all 7 billion people on Earth doing that to some extent every day, which is what sin is, us convincing ourselves that whatever sin we're about to commit is actually worth it, then all 7 billion of us that playing off of each other, like it doesn't work.
Yep.
We can't individually all go off of our own reasoning because we're sinful creatures. Regardless of whether we're rational or the ones created in God's image, we have allowed sin to come into this world, and so now we can't reason like with God's reasoning.
Yeah. I think this is where How Should We Then Live comes in, which is a basically video series or end book talking about Western cultural history. And in the Renaissance, he was talking about, the guy who does it, Francis Schaeffer, how basically all of the elements of the Renaissance were humanistic, in the sense that they were humans are great, humans are all we need, humans are powerful, that kind of thing.
All of the sculptures and paintings were exalting of humans versus exalting of Jesus, like some of the other time periods.
Right. Exactly. Take David by Michelangelo. Like there are certain elements to that which it's supposed to represent like the golden standard of humanity. Like his hands are oversized to
catch footballs,
show basically just to show the strength of humans and things like that. And it's also based off St. Thomas Aquinas' teaching, who taught that while the mind was not fallen, while the body was, basically. But that's not true. Our minds are fallen, our reason is corrupted, right? And we also, reason is not good enough alone, because we don't have, this might sound Disney movie-ish, but we don't have love, if that makes any sense. We couldn't have faith, like faith exists outside of, I don't want to say exists outside of reason, but you wouldn't be able to have faith.
Well, I would argue it does exist outside of reason, because like you can say now, okay, let's go off of this premise. Only the reasoning or the logic or the wisdom, whatever you want to call it, only the reasoning of God can succeed in ruling the perfect humanity, right? But or in governing the perfect humanity, like leading it, kind of. But right now, as sinful people, after sin came into the world, we don't have the reasoning of God, right? So we can't do that. But when you think about the Garden of Eden, before sin even came into this world, we still didn't have it, because they hadn't eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. All they did was have faith in God, and God said, here, do this, go name a bunch of animals. They went and named a bunch of animals. Here, have a wife. He had a wife. Like, here, go take care of these plants. And like, they just had faith in him, and he had all the reason, and he was leading them with his infinite wisdom and reason to live in a perfect place, in a perfect humanity. And then when we tried to apply our own reason and say, oh, but if I eat this, then everything's going to work out even better, then look what happened. So when you look at before the fall and after the fall, where we are now, both of those times, the same thing is true, that we do not have the reasoning of God. So the only time we have had the perfect humanity was when we were relying, and by we, I mean humanity as in Adam and Eve in the garden, we're relying on God's reasoning and just leaning on him, trusting in what he told them to do. If that made any sense.
Right. No, it made perfect sense. Exactly right. Because no matter what, our reasoning will always be flawed unless we truly rest on our Creator.
That's why faith and reasoning are separate in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. All right, final question before we close. Need some donor shout-outs. What do you think Jonathan Swift's overall point with Gulliver's Travels was?
Well, I would say I obviously haven't read the second half, and it sounds like it's very plays a big part in the definition of that. But I would say overall, just exploring humanity, and because he kind of goes at it from a couple different angles in the beginning, from what I've read, and obviously we talked about how he gets to examine from above, but then he also gets to be examined from below. and
Mm-hmm.
then whatever's going on in the second half there. So I would just say to explore humanity, and well, obviously using satires, like we talked about, is to make a cultural point. So I would say just to make cultural points with using satires, exploring humanity.
Yep. So according to the back of my book, it says Jonathan Swift intended this masterpiece, as he once wrote Alexander Pope, to, quote, vex the world rather than divert it. So I agree. I think it is definitely a clever parody of political times in Swift's time, but it's also just a book that's meant to kind of, in a way, vex humanity, insult it, and do all that kind of stuff. So, right. Would you recommend Gulliver's Travels?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny. Probably not going to read it again, but...
Mm-hmm. No, yeah.
I feel like that's just what happens when you have to read a book for school. You read it, and even if you like it, you're like, just don't want to read it again. That's why I prefer, like...
Yeah, and there are certain ones that I'll read again.
Right. If I... Well, yeah, like Pilgrim's Progress,
I'll read
I still really
To Kill a Mockingbird
yeah,
again.
To Kill a Mockingbird, I'd definitely read again. But,
yeah.
I don't know. I feel like if I came across this book, like, by you recommending it, or by someone recommending it, and I just found it, I feel like I would have just liked it way more than having to read it. It's always that way, though. But
as far as my recommendation, I don't know. It depends on who you are. If you like clever satire or sarcasm, you'll like it. It's definitely not like a whimsical... I mean, it is kind of a whimsical adventure, but it's not going to really give you... Well, my point is, it'd be more of an academic read than it would be a fun read. And it's really only for... You'd only like if you were a specific group of people like me and Matthew. If you want to read just the first part, though, I think that'll be good. I think the first part's the best, and it's the most fun for sure. All right, how many Lilliputans out of 1,000 would you give Gulliver's Travels?
Oh, I'll give it a 800.
800, yeah. I'm gonna give it 400 because of the last part, but I give 800 to the first two parts.
Gotcha.
Yep. All right, let's do some donor shout-outs. Where would someone go if they wanted a donor shout-out, Matthew?
To patreon.com/booking
All right.
it.
I don't feel like coming up with a clever thing today. I'm just going to say the patron, then you say the patron's name and shout them out, all right?
Okay.
Nana.
Shout out to Anna.
No, Nana. Sorry,
Nana.
I messed up there.
Well, we've got
Van
both,
Pappy and
so
Wayla.
shout out to both.
Yeah.
Shout out to Van Pappy and Wayla.
Mike and Sylvia.
Shout out to Mike and Sylvia.
Mr. and Mrs. Raetsky.
Shout out to you guys.
Isaiah's Uncle Sebby.
Shout out to Sebby.
And Jenny and Uncle Sam. Oh, by the way, he's getting married soon, right, Uncle Sebby?
Oh, yes. Shout out and congratulations.
Congrats. And Jenny and Uncle Sam.
Shout out to Aunt Jenny and Uncle Sam.
Moses.
Wait, who was it that always said it backwards? Was that you or Tanner?
That's me. I always say it backwards, yeah.
Uncle Jenny and
Sam.
Aunt Sam.
I say Aunt Sam or Uncle Jenny and Aunt Sam is what I say. Shout out and apology.
Yes, shout out and apology.
Apologies, my friends. All right, Moses.
Shout out and howdy, because I haven't seen that kid in a while.
And Zara.
Shout out and howdy as well.
Anna.
Shout out.
Chris.
Shout out.
All right, last but not least, Emily.
Shout out to Emily.
All right. And that concludes the donor shout-outs. Alrighty, guys, thank you so much for listening. Like Matthew said, go to patreon.com/book and support us there. Leave a 5-star rating interview, and don't forget to share with your friends the awesomeness that this podcast is. We'll see you next week with Pride and Prejudice. And until then,
keep on booking it.